Good morning. Buenos días a todos y gracias por estar aquí hoy. Welcome. Joining us today for the 2026 Puerto Rico Economic Forecast Symposium here at the Leopoldo Figueroa Hall in the Capitolio and online on our live stream, which you can find it at theoversightboard.pr.gov. The audio of this meeting is also going to be available in English and in Spanish simultaneous translation online. And this symposium is also going to be translated into sign language. Yo soy Robert Mujica, Executive Director of the Financial Oversight Board and Management Board for Puerto Rico. And this is the second year that we are convening this important symposium to inform Puerto Rico's financial planning and budget process. Reforms such as these are about building a transparent and credible foundation for Puerto Rico's budget and fiscal future before decisions are made, not after. And this is why this symposium is a critical element of transforming the process of how Puerto Rico's government develops a budget going forward. This is a critical year for Puerto Rico's government and the budget process and this transformation. The government and the Oversight Board have begun implementing a co-leadership model to develop a consensual budget in partnership with the Puerto Rico Office of Management and Budget, OJP. In parallel, we are also working with Hacienda, the Treasury Office regarding revenues and taxes, forecasting, and accounting practices. That means initiating the transfer of knowledge, processes, and responsibilities for fiscal and budget matters to the government in preparation for the eventual departure of the board. A consensus view on how the economy in the United States overall and in Puerto Rico performs is an essential part of the budget process. This symposium is a well-established practice used by more than half of the US states. The purpose is to ground decisions in a shared, independent economic forecasts, and if we want responsible budgets, you need to start with an honest, transparent discussion and view of the economy. The economy is a significant factor that is used to assess credit risks by the rating agencies of the US states, local governments, and territories. And Puerto Rico cannot fix its credit without fixing confidence. And confidence starts with credible budgets built on credible economic assumptions. Puerto Rico is institutionalizing this best practice, and this is how we transition from crisis budgeting to institutional budgeting. And this open, transparent public exchange is an opportunity for Puerto Rico's legislative leadership to hear from this distinguished group of economists and evaluate for themselves whether the budget that they will receive from the governor and the Oversight Board this year reflects their own perspective on how the economy of Puerto Rico will support the expenditures that they will have to approve. Before we dive into the subject, I want to thank the leaders of Puerto Rico's Legislative Assembly for hosting us here in this magnificent house of the people of Puerto Rico, particularly the Senate President, Tomás Rivera Schatz, for providing this room. I also want to thank the speaker, Johnny Mendez, who is not here yet, but we have a seat reserved for him right here as soon as he arrives. I want to thank the Senate Vice President, who's sitting next to me, Marisita Jimenez, and Senate Majority Leader Gregorio Matias, for who's also on his way. And the Senate President, who's going to be, these are representing the Senate President, who's not going to be here today. I want to thank the leaders and ranking members of the respective finance committees for being here, particularly Senator Migdalia Padilla, Jose Luis Dalmau, Representatives Eddie Charbonnier, Gretchen Howe, Executive Director of the Legislative Assembly Budget Office, Herquian Martinez, and the executive branch, which is represented by the Treasury Secretary and my colleague, Angel Pantoja Rodriguez, and the Executive Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Orlando Rivera Berrios. So thank you all for being here. We have Hector Morales Martinez, who leads the Puerto Rico Planning Board, who is expected to be here as well. In addition, in the room, we have the Honorable Rafael Hernandez, the Honorable Jesus Santa, former chair of the committee, the Honorable Gabriel Rodriguez Aguilo, and the Honorable Joel Frankie Atiles. We have the Insurance Commissioner, Suzette DeValle, sitting in front of me, the President of UPR, Dr. Zaira Jordan, and the Honorable Angel Morey from the House, and Josiah Jimenez as well. As presenters today, we have Leslie Adames, Director of the División de Análisis y Política de Economía de Estudios Técnicos. We have José Caraballo Puerto, University Professor at the University of Puerto Rico. And we have Xavier Divi, Director of V2A Consulting. Joining us virtually, we will have Michael Sadinick, an Economics Director at S&P Global Market Intelligence, and Gustavo Rojas Matute, Assistant Director at Moody's Analytics. Last year, we witnessed the beginning of a dramatic and rapid change of government policy in Washington, including significant changes to tariffs and spending, reductions to federal agencies and programs. Economic conditions are changing quickly. Inflation, interest rates, and global trade policy shifts make planning ahead more important than ever, particularly as the temporary federal funding that Puerto Rico has become dependent on starts to fade away. The debate around the effects of tariffs on families and businesses in Puerto Rico and elsewhere continues as a point of contention, and uncertainty around federal funding persists. When we met last year, the positive impact of federal funding on Puerto Rico's economy was the subject of much optimism and concern. Puerto Rico's remarkable post-Maria and post-COVID-19 economic performance was largely due to the influx of federal recovery and stimulus funding. By the fourth calendar year of 2021, employment in all of Puerto Rico's major industrial sectors had surpassed their pre-pandemic peaks and remained strong through 2022 and much of 2023. So we will listen carefully to thoughts and projections by our presenters and sharing their views on all of these issues today. For the current year, in 2026, the Puerto Rico Planning Board estimates that real GNP for Puerto Rico of 0.4%. The Department of Economic Development and Commerce Activities Economic Index points to the first fiscal quarter, which ended on September 30th, with a lower projection of 0.3%, which is actually lower than the same period last year. This could suggest economic stagnation, so I look forward to hearing from the panelists. We expect growth in virtually all of Puerto Rico's industrial sectors to slow further as federal funding continues to wither. So what do our panelists think are going to be the leading sectors in Puerto Rico going forward, and which sectors do we see most at risk as the benefits of federal funding recede over the next few years? The unemployment rate has risen modestly since the start of the current year to 5.7, and we fully expect it to continue to rise. Labor force growth has been largely stagnant. This is just current projections, but we'll hear from our panelists. In the U.S. mainland, the job market is slowing. And we can expect a reacceleration, can we expect a reacceleration of job creation here on the island, absent a stronger outlook? Welcome, Senator. We look forward to hearing questions on how our panelists will address this question, as well as the critical question on how the Puerto Rico economy can generate more sustaining growth. Tax collections have remained relatively flat and are projected to decrease in 2026 compared to 24 and 25, although they are higher than our projections earlier this year. And we want to understand whether this should be interpreted as a slight decline in economic growth, or are there other reasons for this decline? Also, all of these things have significant implications for the coming fiscal year, which begins on July 1 of 2026. And they also have implications for long-term government priorities, including what form tax reform will take. In 2027, Puerto Rico faces the possibility of a statutory reduction in federal funding for the Medicaid program, unless the extension of current funding is approved by Congress. And we are going to work hand in hand with the government to make sure that that happens. Unless properly designed, any tax reforms can evolve into a reduction in revenues, so we need to pay attention to how those changes are made, and also make adjustments to the budget if that is what we end up doing. I look forward from hearing from our panelists about the budgetary risks we may be facing and to work to rebuild a culture of fiscal integrity and responsibility. We view this symposium as a key feature. We hope that their future symposiums will become part of Puerto Rico's permanent statutory budget framework. At the end of the day, good budgets start with good data. And I'm looking forward to hearing from what our panelists have to say today. I'm going to turn it over to opening remarks from some of the panelists. Let's go to, we have the majority leaders not here. Let's keep going. ¿Tiene alguna palabra? No?
Bueno,
Okay.
buenos días a todos.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Of Hacienda, Ángel Pantoja.
Muy buenos días, gracias por la...
Good morning. Thank you, Director. Thank you for having me here. President for both legislative bodies, Representative Carlos Johnny Mendez, as well as President Tomas Rivera Schatz. And greetings to all the legislators that are currently here and other colleagues from the executive branch and collaborators. I'm here willing to listen and collaborate, following what the presenters or the panelists speak on for the coming budget processes for fiscal year 2027. So I'm here at your service. Thank you.
Going to go to Representative of the House, Eddie Charbonnier. Do you have any comments or remarks?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Executive Director Mojica. And welcome, everybody, to the best district in Puerto Rico, First District of San Juan, my district. So welcome to my home. I want to recognize the members that are here from the House Budget and Finance Committee, Jimenez, Representative Jimenez, Representative Gabriel Rodriguez Aguiló, Representative Joel Franchi, Representative Angel Morey, Lizzie Burgo, representing the, I don't know how to translate Proyecto Dignidad, Dignity Project, would be my ranking member in my colleague in the House, Rechen Hau. And one important part of our good work here in the House is OPAL Director, Ekira Martinez, and the members of the OPAL, which are in the front row. And also want to recognize two former chairman of this committee, former Speaker Tatito Hernandez, and also my senior advisor in my committee, former representative and former chairman of this committee, Jesus Santa Rodriguez. It is a privilege to join you in the second time at this 2026 Economic Forecasting Symposium. I want to thank you, the FOMB, for convening this space once again, and also acknowledge the participation of the governor's fiscal team, my colleagues from the House and the Senate. and the distinguished panel of experts join us today. For those of us who carry the responsibility of shaping public policy, moments like this are vital. Puerto Rico economic landscapes continues to evolve amid global uncertainty, demographic pressure, and the long-term work of fiscal stabilization. To legislate with responsibility, we must ground our decision in credible data, rigorous analysis, and transparent dialogue. This precisely is what this symposium offers and what we should continue to work together. Today's presentation from all of the panels and experts provide more than a forecast. They offer a shared foundation from which the two main branches of government and the Oversight Board can work toward current and realistic economic outlook. This shared understanding and essential as we prepare for the government's budget and the coming fiscal year to evaluate tax reform proposals and continue advancing the Puerto Rico fiscal transformation. As policymakers, we know that the members alone do not determine our future. What matters is how we interpret them and how we respond to risk and how we prepare for economic downfalls and how we seize opportunity from long-term growth. That requires collaboration, discipline, and commitment. Puerto Rico deserves a government that plans with clarity, acts with responsibility, and builds with a vision. Thank you for all the presenters and the participants for contributing to your information and expertise. I look forward to a productive and insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Next, we're going to go to Orlando Rivera Berrios, the Executive Director of OGP, the Office of Management and Budget. Orlando.
Buenos días a todos. Me uno al saludo protocolar de todos los presentes.
Good morning, everybody. I join the greetings for today. It's an honor to be here today and to listen to what the board is going to present regarding to the economic field. I have to say that the budget planning for 2026 started in August of last year, and it's been done with openness and collaboration with the board, the Oversight Board. I want to mention that it has been of benefit to the office, this openness to get to know how they carry out certain analyses and to transfer all of that knowledge to our office. I think that it's been a different type of budget planning to previous years. It's been an improved process, looking to what the recurring revenue is and what recurring expenses are, and making sure that we balance those two. We're at a better position to prepare the budget for 2026. The one that is working now was certified by the Oversight Board. So analyzing all of the risks that we're sharing, and we're sharing with them with us, we can provide a better position for 2027 budget. And I welcome and I appreciate that openness that the board has had with us. Thank you, Director.
Senator Jose Luis Dalmau, Senate Minority Leader for the Finance Committee.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation. We in the Legislative Assembly are the last to find out about the changes done to the budget. You just heard the colleagues from the budget saying that they've been meeting since August. That's great. But be it whatever it is, we find out when it's certified with just 2 months before that's closed. And then we have a pressure because we have 60 days to evaluate what everybody had a year to evaluate. And I'm glad that my legislative colleagues are here as well, because it's good for us to have this information beforehand to analyze it responsibly and to work with any amendments or changes that might be done. I appreciate being in this forum, and we're here ready to listen to the proposals and to the economic development that we hope that represents for the coming fiscal year. Thank you.
Representative Gretchen Howe, who's also the Minority Leader for the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mojica. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for being present in this important discussion. As we members of the Assembly here in Puerto Rico and being member of the Ways and Means Committee, it's very important for us to continue and talking through all these important topics that we have been discussing right now, and now we're going into a new fiscal year budget. So thank you for the members of the board to be here present, and for all the public and private sectors to be in contribution to keep the information flowing. And it's important for us to have transparency. It's important for us to have the right numbers. It's important for all of us to have the projections so we can work together and make something in the right direction. We have two topics right now going on, tax reform and the upcoming budget. So we need to keep all information flowing so we can do a more precise job here in the Assembly with all the members. Senate, thank you for the senators to be here. I subscribe the words from Dalmau that we're the last ones to always receive the information, but being present means that we have a very high responsibility and we're willingness to keep on talking about this matter. Thank you for all being present, and hope it's very important for the information we're about to receive.
Gracias, Representante.
Thank you, Representative Howe.
I think we've got all the acknowledgments. The planning board, I don't think, is present yet, so we're going to move on. I want to acknowledge and thank all of the government and legislative officials, right, that are accompanying us today. I know the team behind this team are critically important and do much of the work. And when we're sitting at this table, there's a lot of work that goes on behind. So I want to thank all of those who are here, including our colleagues at the Oficina de Presupuesto de la Asamblea en OPAL, and for dedication and their important work for support and planning for Puerto Rico's budget, and all the teams behind OGP and Hacienda and the FOMB teams as well. Only by working together can we actually make progress. With that, I want to turn the floor over to our first presenter, and that is going to be Michael Sadnick of S&P Global, who will be joining us virtually. Michael, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes. You can go. You can begin when you're ready.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Robert, for the kind introduction. I would also like to thank the FOMB for the opportunity to be here today and to share part of our outlook for the U.S. economy with you. As he said, my name is Michael Sadinick, and I'm a director on the U.S. economics team at S&P Global Market Intelligence, where I'm responsible for the forecast of retail sales and consumer spending. I was asked here today to talk to you about the factors impacting our estimates of GDP growth in 2026 and beyond, and to do that, I've brought with me our baseline forecast for January. Now, as a macroeconomist, I'll be painting with a broad brush today, focusing on the data and drivers that inform our outlook for U.S. growth broadly. But I'll be doing this with an eye towards leaving time at the end for you to ask questions so we can focus on the issues most relevant to your symposium. So, without further delay, let's get started. First slide, please. Now, as was said, last year was an unusually uncertain time for business and economic forecasts. And we're talking not just about the impact of policy, but the very direction of it. And that uncertainty showed up several ways in the data. There were swings in the GDP source data, the question of where tariff rates would ultimately settle, the question about the very impact of so much uncertainty on business investment and spending, and of course, we ended the year with the questions around the impacts of the fall's government shutdown. All of these things impacted our outlook for 2025 and made the job of planning for the future unusually difficult. Next slide. But instead, we got a pleasant surprise, and the U.S. economy proved surprisingly resilient. Back in April, a recession looked almost imminent. Markets reacted badly to the announced reciprocal tariffs, and policy uncertainty spiked. But the administration paused those tariffs and reintroduced them later. Yes, at slightly lower levels, but now markets appear to be unfazed by this. So at least part of what we're seeing here, part of what's going on, is the fact that expectations around the impacts of tariffs have become much more sanguine. And the other half of the story is around the declining in policy uncertainty. Levels are still elevated, but overall we're back to a level where we are around the end of 2024. Next slide, please. Which brings us to our outlook for today and to our outlook for 2026, which I would describe as broadly optimistic relative to where we were 6 or 9 months ago. Yes, policy uncertainty remains elevated, but it has declined, and there's no recession in our baseline forecast. The tailwinds that support growth remain, and I've listed those for you here in the right-hand panel, while the headwinds dragging on growth have dissipated somewhat in the second half of 2025. On the left, you see how it all adds up, and you can see undeniably the swings in imports and exports that led to very volatile growth in the first half of 2025. Now let's talk about several of these factors. And we'll start with the reasons for optimism. Last year's budget bill, known as the OBBBA, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, included a large personal tax cut, part of which was retroactive to 2025. So not only will personal tax holdings be reduced in 2026, refunds will also increase earlier this year. And in our view, this should help support disposable personal income and consumer spending through the first half of 2026. On the right-hand panel, that budget bill also included new direct federal spending on both defense and border security that will boost government consumption expenditures and gross investment above our policy baseline pre-OBBA. Next slide. Other tailwinds that are supporting growth this year. Rates are coming down and the mortgage spread is narrowing, which should support development in the housing market. We also believe that aggregate inventories for businesses are likely underbuilt. And at some point this year, business will have to increase production to rebuild these inventories and set this on an upwardly rising path. Finally, one tailwind I'd like to mention, but which is not shown here, is that we expect domestic producers to redirect some of that domestic demand to domestic producers where extra capacity is available. So since imports will be relatively more expensive, that there will be an opportunity there for reinvestment. And this should also add to our outlook for growth. Next slide, please. All right, turning to the factors expected to drag on growth in 2026. As was mentioned, tariffs have been slow to pass through to consumer prices, and we expect that there's still more pass-through to come. Recent data on inflation supports our decision to slow the pass-through of tariffs to consumer prices, but inflation remains stubbornly high, and we expect core PC inflation to remain elevated through 2026. Next slide, please. And above target inflation segues next into our other headwind, which is the fact that after cutting the policy rate by 75 basis points the last 3 meetings of the year, we expect the Federal Reserve to hold rates steady through the first half. And they'll be doing this with an eye towards making sure that the inflationary response from these tariffs is, in fact, transitory. And so while rates have come down in recent months, they've not fallen as quickly as we would have expected otherwise. Next slide, please. Going quickly over a few other headwinds in our forecast. Higher real borrowing costs and reduced business fixed investment. Corporations are facing the highest real borrowing cost in 15 years, and that's, of course, going to weigh on investment. It makes it more expensive. Next slide. And again, I'm including these not to dwell on them, but so they're for your reference. So we have the good data available that informs our forecast. But other headwinds that we have are the diminished fiscal tailwinds that have been supporting growth from the end of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Investments in Jobs Act, both of which supported clean energy tax credits, which have been rescinded, and local growth, local government, federal government spending. Next slide. At the same time, the price of risk is expected to rise in 2026. This is going to drag on growth. You've already seen this in the higher real borrowing costs that corporations are facing, but another place that will show up, our credit spreads are forecast to rise, back to more near their historical norms. And at the same time, our forecast includes a rise in the equity premium that's expected to weigh on equities. We're not taking a stand on where the decline in equities is coming from. This is not a forecast of, is there a bubble in AI tech stocks? It's just broadly that, risk has been underpriced since the pandemic, and we expect those to normalize going forward. Next slide. And all that brings us to our final headwind, which is that immigration is expected to be reduced by about 500,000 people a year over the 4 years of the Trump presidency. And that's an easy way to slow growth. Fewer people means less economic output, unless those fewer people are surprisingly productive. And so this is something that we have in our baseline forecast that's going to, again, weigh on our growth prospects for the next couple of years. Now, we just got new estimates from Census, and so these are the data that we have on hand is pretty in line with what's in our current forecast, but we'll be updating this as we go forward. Next slide. When we put it all together, growth slows unevenly in 2026, but is broadly optimistic. It's looking better than it was expected, like I said, 6 or 9 months ago, the last time I think we spoke. Upward revisions to date our forecasts in recent months have been driven by stronger than expected historical data in both the third and likely in the fourth quarter. Third quarter GDP growth came in at 4.3%, and that wasn't just because of the swings in imports and exports. Underlying final sales to domestic purchases has been strong in the last couple of years. So in our forecast, this results in a labor market that bends but doesn't break. So the unemployment rate rises to about 4.7% in 2026. But unless there's some external shock that's going to, cause a large decrease in demand, that's going to inspire firms to start laying people off in large numbers, we're not seeing, the type of shock that would trigger what we believe there to be a recession. Cool. The rest of the slides that I have for you are mainly for your reference. This shows what is driving the slowdown in GDP growth broadly, which is a decline in PCE. Consumption, real spending. This is because real wealth growth is slowed, and with the rising price pressures, growth of real DPI has slowed as well. Again, exacerbated by slowing wage growth. The last couple things I have for you are just the numbers from our forecast. If you like these for your reference, we update these monthly. We have our key policy assumptions for our forecast, which this is always very important to remember in this sort of budget processing, is set road signs for yourself. Be aware and cognizant of what your assumptions are and how they impact your decision making, and be aware of what it would take for you to change them. What data do you need to see incoming that would make you rethink some of these assumptions? And then finally, I think I have for you the hallmarks summarizing the U.S. forecast, which is kind of our narrative explanation. I think we have plenty of time for questions, so I'm happy to talk more about the labor market, but I'd also like to open up the floor for you to ask about what particularly is driving our outlook for the U.S. economy.
Thank you, Director. And just so everyone understands, the Director, Sadnek, he's the Director of U.S. Economics team for SMB Global Market Intelligence. He leads the forecasting for U.S. consumer markets, for spending, income, and prices, and develops the analysis for linking the U.S. economy to household and consumer sector trends. So thank you. You took us on a little bit of an arc during that presentation to where we ended up. If there's no questions now, we can go to questions later, but if we have some, okay. All right, then thank you, and we're gonna go to our next presenter. You do? Okay, I'm sorry, the secretary here of Hacienda has a couple questions.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Hi. In terms of the personal consumption expenditures, you mentioned that has decreased, let's say for the last year. Do you have identified the drivers on that decrease? And my second question would be on the disposable income, the last chart that you presented at the end of the presentation. How would you address the decrease in disposable income for personal disposable income, considering what the economic behavior in 2025 and going forward? How would you, what do you foresee is going to happen in that end?
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic question, and the question that I expected to get right off the bat today is, there's been a lot of concern about jobs right now. What's going on in the labor market, and what's our expectations for the future? And yes, it's clear job gains have slowed, and in fact, tomorrow we're going to get new data from the BLS that's likely to revise down estimates of payroll employment gains since March of 2024. So an already soft labor market may soon look even softer, and that is really the connection between jobs and income that's going to drive, that decline in disposable personal income and consumer expenditures. Those two things are linked. If we look at the data more closely, consumers are broadly, treading water. Spending has risen in line with incomes, but not anymore. They're not taking on debt because they're worried about future financial prospects after deleveraging following COVID, and they're not spending beyond their means. But they're also not cutting back yet because unemployment rate at 4% for the U.S. is still not, anywhere near a level where the impact on spending is going to be seen in the aggregate data. So what the real question that, we have here. The issue that we're trying to reconcile is how do we frame the slowdown in hiring with the solid growth that we're seeing? And there's three things I can say there. That hiring is slow because firms are broadly still hanging on to their existing workers. Layoffs have started to increase, but we're still seeing net job gains, particularly in sectors that are insulated from a lot of parts of the business cycle, like healthcare, and that's driven by demographic change. But also growth has been solid because productivity has been fairly robust coming out of the pandemic the last couple of years. Now, I'm not saying that that's AI showing up in the data yet, but we're starting to see businesses who are getting a lot out of their current workforce, and so there's not a lot of pressure for them to add hiring there, but growth still is solid. Finally, with the slowdown in population growth, we need less new jobs every month, every year to make up for to keep the unemployment rate steady. That's known as the break-even rate. So going forward, the next couple of years, we'll see actually this dichotomy where less hiring can still lead to fairly solid growth because there's not quite the demand that there was there previously, or the supply of labor. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director. Thank you very much. Very insightful.
Thank you so much. Good luck today, everyone.
Thank you. And these presentations, just so everyone, there's a lot of information in them. We're going to be posting them on the Oversight Board's website, so you'll be able to access them. Next, we have Gustavo Rojas Matute. He's visiting us again this year from last year. Gustavo is the Assistant Director of Moody's Analytics. He brings more than 20 years of experience advising international corporations, financial institutions, and policymakers across the United States and Latin America, with a focus on monetary policy, macroeconomic forecasting, and data-driven analysis. So with that, Gustavo, can you hear us? Oh, there we go. I see you.
Yes.
I see you now.
Perfectly.
I see you now. Great.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. So you can get started when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. And the only thing is that unfortunately I'm not there in Puerto Rico right now, but just on the distance. But thank you very much to the Junta and all the organizers of this event for this year. So I'm going to focus today most on the Puerto Rican economy directly. We already heard some of the insights from Michael, and I think there is a relative consensus regarding what is going to happen or the outlook for the United States for the economy of the mainland. So I'm going to start focus directly on what is going on in Puerto Rico. So in my agenda, the first point is going to be what the recent performance, what we have so far with the data, and then I'm going to focus on threats and opportunities as I see that the Puerto Rican economy right now it's facing a turning point. It's there are a couple of immediately threats on the Puerto Rican economy that needs to be in a certain way addressed. One is a significant reliance on federal funds, we know that, and the other one is the population, the current situation of the population. There is a declining population in the long run, and that is going to be one of the main threats for the Puerto Rican economy. So, Director Mujica at the beginning was asking what are the main drivers of the economy right now. We still have seen since the pandemic. I'm not saying that the Puerto Rican economy started actually with the pandemic, but this is just an index or a reference point that we are using here. It's what happened right after the pandemic, or we are using the pandemic of February 2020 actually as the index. And we can see here the main two drivers. There are three main drivers that we can actually see in this chart. The first one is construction, which as we know, it's fueled by federal funds. We still see some job gains in the construction sector. Actually, this year was quite positive in that terms, as we can see the green line at the top of the chart. it was a very good year, despite all the uncertainties that we had last year, at the beginning of last year, regarding the potential disbursement or the cut of potential cuts of disbursement of the federal funds. The second line, it's transportation and warehousing, but this area is more is a driver, of course, but it's more related to construction, as we can see, as they, of course, is being used for, store materials, etc., the transportation of the materials that are being used in the construction sector. But the third one is tourism, or leisure and hospitality, which last year had actually a very good year. Last year in May, when we met in May last year, we talked about the potential effects of the Bad Bunny residency, etc. And it was a very good. Can we go back to the previous one? All right. So it was a very good year with the 30 concerts, and also because the Puerto Rican economy had already that good trend, but there are a couple of things here. The first one is that the main driver, which is construction, it relies mainly on federal funds, on the disbursement of federal funds. And the second one, which is leisure and hospitality, depends, or the visitors that are coming to the island, depends heavily on the job markets of the U.S. So that is a main problem, because as we can see, Michael just talked about that. We are seeing a slowdown in the job market in the mainland, and we are seeing potentially less visitors to the island in the coming year. So now we can move to the next slide. And as we can see, this is a comparison of the monthly passengers that are coming to San Juan, the Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport. During the Bad Bunny residency, July, August, September, we saw positive numbers, even compared with 2024. But now we are still seeing some signs of softening of that the numbers of tourism are probably softening right now. All right, so let's move to the next slide. All right, the economic activity index for Puerto Rico, it's a kind of puzzle for analysts, because there are some very good data for last year, for 2025, regarding the economy, payrolls, job gains, etc. Despite there was a slight increase in the unemployment rate, the economy was supposed to perform relatively well last year. However, the data from the economic activity index reflects something different. It was basically under negative territory during almost all the year. Only the data is right now up to October and November. Only October and November reflect some positive growth rate at the end of the year. So it's a kind of positive, but it's sending, mixed results here. The data is sending mixed results here. Is a kind of confusing though. So we will need to wait until the releases of the next GDP to see if actually that data from the economic activity index is matching with the final GDP from the government of Puerto, when the government of Puerto Rico released the data. Next slide, please. All right, so as Director Mojica also mentioned at the beginning of this conference, the unemployment rate has been increasing. It has been increasing also in parallel with the U.S. economy, of the unemployment rate of the U.S. economy. But we still see that the unemployment rate will kind of remain around historical low levels of 6% or so in the coming year. So at least until the end of the decade. One of the reason is that in our baseline, we still have that the federal funds will continue to be disbursed until 2035, which is the timeline that the the junta has shown in their projections. So we are not going to see potential effects. I mean, when we talk about the federal funds, of course, our government spending in economics, we talk about the multiplier effects of the fiscal or the fiscal multiplier effects, which is would you increase the spending, and then there is going to be an effect on the economic growth. However, this occurs when the economy is unemployed. I mean, when there are significant levels of resources that are currently unemployed, and then you start putting into the economy again. However, when the economy reaches such level, which is basically the 6%, it's a historical law, is basically telling us that the economy is operating at full employment. And therefore, the effects are basically fading. So we are going to see some job gains still in the construction sector, or at least they are going to maintain some of those jobs because of the disbursement of federal funds. However, what we are not going to see is effects in the economic side, in the GDP, because the economy is already operating at full employment, and therefore there are no effects of putting more money into the economy when all the factors are already being used. So that is one of the main concerns we have right now regarding the Puerto Rican economy. So next slide. So therefore, we have a very weak forecast for the GDP in the coming years. This forecast is not very different from what we projected last year. Has not changed significantly. It's very weak. This is in terms of level, as we can see here is the index of the GDP. But the main, if we see the green line, which is our current January 2026 baseline, it's very flat. It's slightly better than we projected in September, in our baseline September, because our model is a top-down model. It depends also on the U.S. economy, and the U.S. economy slightly improved the outlook because of lower tariff. So that is also being to translate into a better GDP in the United States, also a better GDP in Puerto Rico too. So, but still, if you see the growth rate, in terms of the growth rate are basically very weak. We are seeing growth rate less than 1%, less than 0.5% in the coming years until the end of this decade. And in comparison with other states and territories of the United States, Puerto Rico will continue to underperform in that sense when compared to others, other states and territories of the main. So the other factor, the other line you see here is the nowcast, is the red line, is the nowcast that we use by using the economic activity index. So as you saw in the previous slide, the economic activity index was showing that the economy was in negative territory last year. So if that is the case, we will actually be seeing a negative growth rate in the fiscal year 2025. So, but let's wait until the Junta de Planificación, the planning board, actually releases the new data of the GDP to see if they actually match with the economic activity index. Next slide, please. All right, threats and opportunities. So what we have so far here is an economy that depends on basically a couple of sectors, or I'm not going to say it depends only of a couple of sectors, but the drivers currently are just a couple of sectors: construction, and leisure and hospitality, which is basically tourism. The rest of the sector, if you remember the first slide I showed, manufacturing, those sectors that are actually professional or business services, those sectors that actually concentrate the most share of employment in Puerto Rico are completely flat. They have been basically, which is, if you see the vaso medio vacío or el vaso medio lleno, in a certain way, is good because those sectors are not declining, but at the same time, those sectors are not growing. But there are some opportunities, for instance, in the manufacturing sector, I want to mention right after that. But the other sectors we need to be try to understand what is going to happen. So next slide is going to show that, next slide, please. Okay, the next slide is going to show eventually that the economy, it's the high reliance on the federal funds.
We go back a couple slides. I think you might not be getting the changes, but they're changing here. So.
Oh, okay. I'm not
yeah.
seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the.
You're not seeing the changes. So we're on the reliance of federal funds lessons table that shows.
Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna tell you just by memory.
Yeah.
That what we can see there, it's in that chart, is basically that the economy has become more reliant on federal funds right after the pandemic, and it makes, of course, a total sense because first we had Hurricane Maria, and then we had the pandemic. So there was a significant increase in the number of federal funds that were being disbursed to the Puerto Rican economy. Right now, I'm not seeing anything here, but you probably are seeing. The good thing is that not the good thing, but what we can notice here in this chart is that the reliance is actually declining. That is something you need to be. I'm not going to say a little worried, but what are the current factors that? Okay, now I have it. All right. So what we say will continue to be. It's still very high or higher than what it used to be before the pandemic, but it's declining. It's declining. So is this an opportunity or is this a threat? Well, it's going to depend on what the government and the economic development department are currently doing in order to reshape the economy. Try to take advantage of some of the other factors, additional factors that, in order to diversify the economy and find the additional alternatives to the reliance of federal funds. Next slide, please. But there are here, you can see some of the most of the municipalities that actually have a higher reliance on federal funds. Most of them are actually located in the south of the island, as you can see here. So those are some sectors that in terms of local government needs to find alternative in order to overcome that significant reliance. Next slide, please. So one of the opportunities that actually Puerto Rico has right now, it's take advantage of the tariff policy in areas like the pharmaceutical. So Puerto Rico has an extraordinary infrastructure for the pharmaceutical sector, and actually is quite better than the rest of the U.S. in terms of at least as a share of total employment, as we can see here in this chart. So this is one of the great opportunities that Puerto Rico has as a higher tariff to pharmaceutical are actually could be translated into more benefit for the island. Next slide. Yeah, but one of the other threats that the economy has is actually that the population is getting older. And this is one we can see here at municipal levels. What are the areas that are more critical? But at the same time, when we see the green areas here, those green areas is that where the age, the median age is actually less than 40. We have young people there. Most of them are concentrated or located in areas where there are campuses. So the interaction between manufacturing, new technology, investment, and academia, I mean the campuses of the universities, is actually a great opportunity to, bring younger people to the island and increase and improve, some of those areas at the same time. Next slide. And finally, AI, it's one of the new potential opportunities, but also at the same time threats that are rising right now. And one of the what we want to show in this chart is that there are some areas or municipalities that are more vulnerable or more exposed to the rise of AI. And most of them is because those sectors like professional and business services are actually more vulnerable to the rise of artificial intelligence. Could potentially be replaced by artificial intelligence in the future. So those are basically, this is my current presentation. So I have some time, I guess, for Q&As.
Yes, Gustavo, this is Efrain Martinez, Director of OPAL. I do have 2 questions. The first one, do you have inflation prospects for the next couple of months to the mainland U.S.? And whether do you see inflation in Puerto Rico play differently due to varying factors, or if inflation will be more or less the same? Thank you.
More or less the same than the U.S. You mean?
Yes.
Sorry,
correct,
one of the part it got here. This is a very nice discussion. We actually had a talk with one of your members, Juan Carlos Torres, about the relationship between the inflation in Puerto Rico and the inflation in the mainland, and because some of the data is showing that the inflation in Puerto Rico is actually lower than the mainland, but there are some discussions about that because the current characteristic of the island is that it needs to import all the inputs from the mainland, and therefore there is this belief that should be actually higher than that. So what I can say is that because tariffs are going to affect directly all the prices in the mainland, therefore they should be also being passed through the island at the same time. So I'm not, in terms of change, they should be more or less being affected the same. The only potential benefit that Puerto Rico can get is if Puerto Rico can take advantage of the current tariff policies in order to develop a more the manufacturing area that in order to increase the local production, domestic production, that can also benefit. But in the coming 2 months, 3 months, basically inflation from the mainland would be also passed through inflation to prices in Puerto Rico. That is a fact.
Thank you.
Any other questions any other questions?
I don't got Mr. Director, I don't got a question, but just a quick comment. I'm a member of the CSG, both CSG and NCSL Security Committee member, and we're discussing the reliance on federal funds. And it's not exclusive for Puerto Rico. The state have the same reliance on federal funds as Puerto Rico. Just a quick fact. It's the same number. I know we should look forward to a different practice, but it's the same number of states and the territories.
Yeah. I think the distinction might be if you actually look at recurring federal funds, Puerto Rico is actually the same, if not maybe even a little lower in some places, actually, as some of the states, actually. On recurring federal funds, I think they actually might be even a little lower than some states, probably because of Medicaid and some of the other factors. But as a result of the emergency funds, which includes the temporary funds, that brings the reliance higher because the extraordinary amount of temporary funds, which is just extraordinary because of the weather events that happen. So I think that's a distinction. But when you take out the emergency, Puerto Rico is at or below, actually, compared to other states.
Thank you. That's a question that we have.
That's correct. That's correct. the program, emergency funds or relief programs are actually higher than the rest.
What,
But the,
what was that? I'm sorry. Wait, what was that, Gustavo?
no. Well, exactly what you say. It's the emergency funds or the relief programs that for FEMA, etc., are higher than other states. But that is exactly what you say. I agree with you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panelists? Any other questions? No. Gustavo, thank you very much. Always very informative. I also just wanted to acknowledge we had a couple of arrivals during that time, so I want to acknowledge the presence of the Senate Majority Leader, Gregorio Matias Rosario. Welcome. And then also, I want to acknowledge that the head of the planning board, Hector Morales Martinez, is also joining us. So thank you. Next, we'll go to our next presenter, and that will be Leslie Adames. The focus here is going to be on Puerto Rico's economic conditions. Mr. Adames is the director of the Economic Analysis and Policy Division at Estudios Técnicos and has extensive experience in economic policy, market analysis, economic impact studies, and financial feasibility evaluations. So with that, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días a todos.
Thank you very much and good morning. For the benefit of everybody, I'm going to speak in Spanish because it's a lot of information and I want to take advantage of the available time. I think we should start with the argument that Puerto Rico, without a doubt, is facing a complicated economic panorama. I don't think that's a secret. I think we all have that same understanding. The problem isn't that it's a complicated economic environment, but rather that the statistics, if we look at them at a granular level, they present a bit more of a fragile or delicate story than what we've been hearing. So let's start with the labor market. It's a fact that employment has been increasing after December. A bit up over 9,000 jobs were created, and it's a fact that in 2024 a bit over 10,500 were created, and it's a fact that in 2023 almost 24,000 was the number. But it's also a reality that employment has been losing momentum, slowing down throughout time, and I think that is related to what a previous speaker said about how Puerto Rico is possibly operating at its maximum capacity in terms of its workforce. And it is what it is. We're talking about a creation that is ever slower for jobs and that has effects. It's a reality that the unemployment rate is historically low. I remember various years ago seeing unemployment rates of 16%. But a 5.5% unemployment rate is nothing to celebrate when we look at the statistics and we look at them more granularly and we look at the unemployment rate for young people in the island from 16 to 24 years of age is between 10 and 24%. When we want to retain the youth for them to contribute and support economic initiatives in the country. It's also a reality that the percentage of employment generated during the past year has concentrated in part-time employment, while full-time employment has been reducing. What does this mean? People are being employed, but they don't have job security, and the quality of that employment in terms of benefits is less. It's a more delicate situation, and as an effect, that has certain implications to their mobility. So the labor market, it is what it is. it presents resilience, but the statistics show that without a doubt the situation is more complicated than some say. The commercial sector has a similar story. If we look at sales statistics adjusted to inflation, it's a very slow growth when it comes to sales. But if we look at the statistics for establishment, we can see three things specifically for consumers and retail sales. They are consuming less. They are consuming more goods that are associated to daily life needs. We're seeing that establishments that sell those products are experimenting very slow sales growth. And we are seeing that there is a surprising amount of growth in some establishments that specialize in luxury products. And what this means is that the one that has money and is not sensitive to changes in price can spend more money on that type of things. But most of the people who don't have that power to acquire, they don't have that flexibility to consume what they want. And the statistics for the closing of 2025 from the planning board evidence this. For long-lasting goods or perishable goods in certain stores, there's a huge decrease in consumption. And that's nothing other than consumers adjusting their consumption pattern due to the pressure that they're experiencing in their purchasing power. So it's not surprising that retail sales are growing at that rhythm and that automobile sales are contracting, because beyond inflation, we have an increase in interest rates, and there's an access problem when it comes to the cars that are being sold. They are very expensive. So that is also affecting the rhythm for growth in commercial activity in automobile dealers. And we've seen more bankruptcies, more commercial bankruptcies in an environment where there's inflation and there's a pressure on operational expenses. This is an environment where there are also high interest rates, and obviously a lot of establishments are going to experience a reduction in sales, and therefore they'll be forced to limit their operations or restructure them in light of the new economic reality. When it comes to the construction sector, we're going to discuss that later on, but I do want to say that it is true that cement sales have been on the rise during the recent months, and the expectations that we had for a boom in the construction industry's activity due to federal construction funds, that hasn't been seen, or at least not in the form that many of us expected. And the truth is, this is due to many reasons. Number one, a slow release of those federal funds. And number two, nowadays, there isn't a capacity to use all of those funds, and we're going to see why. Consumers, we see an increase in inflation of 1.4%, and the average salary of workers in non-agricultural fields has increased more than what inflation has increased, which suggests that salaries have improved, but in the last months, we've seen it be stuck or stagnation in true growth, and this is consistent with the statistics we've seen from the planification board or the planning board, and those available funds were stagnant in fiscal year 2025. So we have consumers with a pressure in their budgets who have had to support themselves using credit. for their consumption. And today, that represents a moderate fragility for their economic reality that could possibly worsen in the next months if the patterns that we're observing in the labor market and in terms of prices do not change. They talked about the economic activity index, and what we have to say here is that it was already in a negative territory, negative 0.71% for the January to December period, when we were coming from a 1.42% growth index. And inflation, or growth in inflation, has been slowing down. In June 2022, it was 7%. Here, for January and November, we're talking about 1.45, but let's be careful, because when we analyze this in detail or a granular level, inflation for goods and services, most of them first need or fundamental for consumers, it's duplicating, in some cases, triplicating the average inflation in Puerto Rico. 16% for eggs. So you have an idea. I paid $11 for a dozen eggs the other day. That's the number you can see here. And that's what a lot of people are paying with purchasing power that has been compromised at this time due to inflation. So the real salary in aggregate terms has been growing correctly, but the real salary is not parallel to the growth that we're seeing in the prices in the economy. And this is what causes a situation of financial vulnerability that is very serious for consumers in the island. In Puerto Rico, personal consumption expenses represent more than 90%. Well, if we look at the statistics, the most recent ones, the last 3 years, it represents more than 98% of the gross national product. Why? Because in Puerto Rico, there has been a massive injection of non-recurrent federal funds that at its start or at its beginning led to the growth in personal consumption expenses. And when we see the statistic, that translated into a 1 or 2% increase during the past fiscal years. But those $15 million that the consumer received, or 15 billion, I should say, that already dissipated. And that consumption expense was substituted in a context where the real salary has been stagnant due to a growth in credit given by financial institutions in Puerto Rico equivalent to $440 million. So, given the absence of a growth in real income and under the pressure of inflation that doesn't stop in a context where credit has grown as it has, the reality is that yes, the PBI or the GDP is about 95% of what is consumed in the island, and that's going to help it grow, but it has some growth, some risks that we need to consider. When it comes to the construction sector, we have a lot, billions of dollars that are already committed, but we have more. They're obliged, but we have many more that have not been disbursed. And if that slow disbursement is tied up to the fact that in Puerto Rico there isn't enough of a workforce for construction, and that the cost for construction materials keeps growing, and that the cost will continue to grow due to an expansion and a proliferation of investment in data centers in the U.S. that requires this raw materials. And if we add to that in the U.S. in 2026, there's an estimate that 500,000 employees will be needed in construction other than all of the other ones that were needed on the previous year, we're talking about a salary differential that is an incentive for those workers to leave Puerto Rico and go to earn a higher salary in the U.S. And that is limiting, basically, the possibilities of us being able to have growth that we had bet on at some point in Puerto Rico with the flow of these federal funds. And to complicate things, there are developers in Puerto Rico, but they don't have the financial capacity nor the cash flow to take on these big reconstruction projects. So we have an environment where there are funds, but the timeline for the disbursement of these funds, and let's think then that all of those projects that are in the pipeline, their effect would be translated in subsequent fiscal years. If we're lucky, and some of these federal funds aren't reduced. I don't think that's the case. That's not what we're predicting in our research. So in terms of relevant funds, we're talking about $44 billion of reconstruction funds that are ready to be disbursed. And due to the limitations that I just mentioned, it's not reasonable to think that we're going to be spending until 2035 $44 billion. It's more reasonable to think that it's likely that due to the capacity limitations that we have, what is going to be able to be absorbed into the economy is going to be between $2.5 billion annually. The problem is that if the materials cost continues increasing, that amount is going to fade away. And if we could fund 15 projects before, then it's most likely that we're only going to be able to fund half of them. And the multiplying factor on that, we expect it to be then lower than what we initially expected. The consumer, I already told you that they have a financial pressure that comes from inflation. It comes from the fact that the real salary isn't growing. It comes from interest rates that are still pretty high. And this graph that you can see here shows the consumer's debt to personal disposable income percentage, and you'll see that in 2015, out of every dollar that they had available, they had 63 cents that were a debt, or that they owed. That went down to almost 39 cents out of a dollar in 2022, and it went up to 44 cents in 2025. And this is worrying because their leverage, their consumers' leverage is increasing. It's a context where there's uncertainty when it comes to the job market, to employment possibilities, and even more worrying because this statistic that you see here is being underestimated. And I'll tell you why. Because we're not taking into consideration credit card debt that is given by banks and other financial institutions in the U.S. What does this mean? That the ratio that you see there that says 44.2% easily could be 45 or 47% if that information were available. So a consumer with their leverage, where they have a weaker net worth and they don't have a margin to save money, then their accumulation of capital in Puerto Rico with negative rates, it's very limited, and that's where the dependence of non-recurrent federal funds comes in. But if we look at the metrics qualities for asset quality metrics for commercial banks in Puerto Rico, we can see that delinquency for credit cards, in portfolios, for consumer loans, automobiles, that is already greater than the fourth trimester in 2019. And you can say, of course, but it's lower than the historic value. Yes, of course it is, but I don't care about that. What I'm interested about is how it's evolving semester after semester or quarter after quarter. And we're seeing a deterioration that is worsened by a statistic that isn't here, but that we see with a lot of regularity. The percentage of people that are credit card owners that are paying the minimum, that is increasing relative to those that pay the whole amount at the end of their month. What does that mean? There's a serious cash flow problem for consumers, and they're not necessarily paying for their credit card debts the same way. Their consumption patterns and consumption patterns are changing, and this has important implications because this deterioration in quality indicators for banking quality, what it indicates is that banking, to protect itself from credit risk, possibly is going to implement loan policies that are more restrictive, which will have adverse implications on consumer growth and investments. So we're finishing. In terms of federal funds, it's a risk that worries us a lot in technical research because in fiscal year 2025, there was a transference of $38 billion that increased in relation to 2016, and 43% of the funds are discretionary. This means that if the federal government decides to make an adjustment in their spending to work with their fiscal situation, we know it's very fragile, and that's how the stock market is calling it, then there could be a reduction in federal funds that would impact consumers materially. So it's the same story when it comes to Puerto Rico's government. We took the task of seeing what the certified budget is for 2026 to then identify some of the agencies with the greatest risk of operational disruption due to the possibility of there being a reduction in federal spending. I don't even have to say it. Department of Housing, Department of Health, ASES, they rely more than 47% of their budget relies on federal funding. So this is very worrying. So what does this mean? In light of financial research, we're usually very conservative with our projections, and they're obviously led by the premise that we have to contemplate risks and that projections are just a planning tool. So what that tells us, and this is our narrative, is that yes, recovery funds or reconstruction funds will continue to be the main the main source of leverage for economic growth in short, medium, and long term. And of course, it'll have an important impact. It represents 82% of Puerto Rico's GNP. But if the process for these funds is not accelerated for their disbursement, then that impact is not going to be felt like we would want to. There's interesting things that are happening. The topic of reshoring is interesting. This is supporting manufacturing. We're seeing the introduction of production lines in the island, and that implies investment, not necessarily in buildings, but investment. We are seeing that the aerospace sector continues to get strong. That's positive. We're seeing an expansion in the ecosystem of small and medium businesses, even though the reality is that the rhythm of creation of new businesses in Puerto Rico has been reduced considerably in the past months, and we're seeing a workforce that, as I said before, due to our strength in the service sector and tourism, but it's also worrying because activity in tourism, it depends greatly on what happens with the labor market in the U.S., and statistics today aren't very encouraging in regards to what is going on with the job market. And even though the balance sheet for consumers in the U.S. might be reflecting some stability, that doesn't change the fact that there are adjustments going to be made in their budgets, and that is going to impact the amount of visits to the island. We have that inflation will continue to strain household and business finances. And we also have the Medicaid cliff. It presents a serious risk. We're looking at that seriously in Estudios Técnicos, and that could have an important impact after 2028. We're not contemplating a complete exit of those funds, but we are contemplating the possibility of a renegotiation, but with some higher percentages, at least in our base scenario. Federal funds are an important source to finance consumption, but as I said, we have a negative savings rate, and we can't depend on these federal funds. So what does that leave us with? Looking for alternatives that would allow us to add external capital to the island. In that sense, it seems to me that measures such as the ones that have been discussed in the Legislative Assembly, such as the Equality Project or the Tax Equality Project, that could affect things over here. Hacienda and Opal estimated that impact at 100 million, but the benefits are 6 times that fiscal cost. We're talking about almost $3 billion in 5 years. So that injection of funds to the island, without a doubt, is going to promote not just investment, consumption, and it's a financial system that is protecting its liquidity because there are liquidity issues out there. This helps to support liquidity. So I want to finish basically with the economic perspective that we have, and that's that for fiscal year 2026-27, there's a contraction rate of negative 0.9%. And for 2028, without a doubt, with the premises that we've looked at, including a reduction in consumption growth, inflation impacts, we're considering a 50% reduction in the assignment of recurring funds. Like we mentioned for Medicaid, the economy would be dropping to a negative 2% in 2031. Of course, a lot of things can happen that can change this, definitely. But the risks that we're seeing overcome these things that might be happening. And that brings us to a last point. These numbers that you see here is a reflection of an economy where we've been implementing a policy that we possibly need to rethink. And what this tells me is that we need to restructure the whole economic system for Puerto Rico. Or, if not, every year we're going to have the title of the presentation that we saw New Year, same worries, and we don't want that. Thank you.
That's what I hear. So, vamos a empezar con...
Let's start with the Senate Majority Leader.
Hello, I have a question. I will go straight to what you were saying about the majority of jobs that are part-time jobs. Most jobs that have been created over the past year, that is correct, are part-time jobs. And as part of your studies, you say, okay, this is the problem. What should we do to correct this? Do you do that? Yes, of course. And when you see that most jobs created were part-time jobs, what alternative did you look at for that to change? Well, there's no doubt in my mind that the reason why jobs are part-time is because there's uncertainty out there in the business sector as to what will be happening with the economy in Puerto Rico and inflation and the costs that are being introduced to us as business people. The cost of electricity is one of them that harms businesses a great deal and putting a lot of pressure on operational structures without a doubt. So if you ask me what could be done, well, there's no doubt in my mind that we should prevent the introduction of measures that will financially strangle small businesses and mid-sized businesses that are the ones who carry the burden, most of the burden. And another thing is that there's also a lack of labor. That is true for the states and Puerto Rico, yes. Also about the laws that put pressure on the people. I hope that people are listening and the members of the board are listening and will give us the opportunity to legislate, because we do have talent that wants to work. They're in public housing, communities that receive aid, assistance. Let's say that a person wants to work, but then they have negative rent, and then after 3 months, they have a rent increase of $800, so then they try to work part-time. But if we were to pass a legislature and we are given the opportunity to establish a plan to see a transition, I will guarantee to you we will be able to find labor and full-time jobs, because right now we have thousands of citizens who live in Puerto Rico and are currently living through aid from the government, housing assistance, and there is no transition. Their property will just be taken away from them if they start working full-time. But I want to pass legislation. I would like the members of the board to help us with that, so that there is a transition and that they come fight with us to Congress and we can have this transition. We need labor, and a lot of that money that can't be dispersed is because when we go to auctions or bids, there's nobody there to participate in the bid. So we have to find a way to motivate people so that we can use the money. And second, to say, look, you're not going to start working and then the next day your rent is going to go up, and whatever you're earning will not be enough to live, because then you won't be able to pay your rent or buy your food. So I think in Puerto Rico we can do a lot more, but we do need some help, because as you said, we don't have labor. Sometimes it's like a desert. You go around Puerto Rico and I visited South America. You don't see any signs about hiring, and here it's all over. They're everywhere. So with the help of the members of the Oversight Board and Congress, we could put these people to work through a transition. It could be, a few months, because right now they're afraid of losing their assistance. So they come and work for a little while, but then they withdraw from the job market again. So I think with some help we can achieve this. That was all. Very well. Yes, I have a question. There are two bills. One of the House, that's Bill 501, and 488 of the Senate, that says that for all residents of Puerto Rico with Act 60 with a 4% rate for capital gains. I would like your opinion about that. Well, I think I mentioned that before. In an economy where saving rate is negative, without savings, there is no investments, you see. And in an economy where we rely on federal funds and on the occurrence of events such as Hurricane Maria or COVID pandemic for $15 million to come in, or billions to come in, and that gives us a break. But that's a problem as a country. And I think that if we are able to attract capital from foreign countries would be positive. I think if there are taxpayers who have some capital gains and are paying taxes at 15, 24%, and then all of a sudden it's modified, the law is amended, so their rate goes down to 4%. This could encourage these people who have such money and capital abroad for them to bring that capital here, and that would be a source of income to finance consumption and investment. And I say this with all certainty that abroad, when we analyze statistics of the financial system, there are a series of issues. One is liquidity. Two, lack of diversification of financial systems to provide financing. And number three, the appetite for providing financing to small and mid-sized businesses is low. And in sectors or segments where we should be financing, actually. So if you ask me what I think that estimates, and it's not our own estimates, I'm talking about the estimates of OPAL and the Treasury Department, indicate the cost as $100 billion, but it could also result in a profit, and in the least of optimistic scenario, that would be double that number. And the more realistic, that would be $3 billion accrued over a period of 5 years, so that's 6 times that cost. So there could definitely be very important repercussions on an economy where we need the liquidity to finance the economic activity. Thank you. I heard you mention specifically, and we have our members from OPAL and the legislative component. I wanted to be clear as to which bill we were talking about. There's Bill 501 of the House that has to do with Act 60 to extend it to 20 years. And the other is the 4% for everybody. There's also the bill, that, although it's only one time, it's the joint resolution that has to do with the tax reform. If it's the one regarding Act 60 specifically, yes, I'm referring to the one that establishes 4% applicable to all, both residents and non-residents. And the second, as to numbers, because it's important to compare, estimates that the estimate was a little different. I wanted to clarify the numbers. As to the topic of federal funds, the COVID money that is phasing out, but also the topic of reconstruction in Puerto Rico, how do you measure that number? Are you measuring at a period over a period of 5 years or 10 years? 41 billion assigned, I'm rounding off, and 12 billion that have been disbursed. What does the phasing out look like if it's over a period of 5 years, 10 years? And lastly, I have not heard anybody mention the topic of an investment in the military. Oh, there was a real investment because of Venezuela and Fort Buchanan, Aguadilla, Ponce. That is in the budget of the federal government, and also an economic activity that is taking place these days. So I think that will be positive for the economy, but I have not heard you mention that. And have you measured it? And also, to be clear, I would like to hear that about the bills and recommendations. Well, you've just asked me many questions, and yeah, well, they know me. Yeah, I know, but I have some ADD, so I'll try to answer all those questions, but In relation to the bills you were referring to, I was talking about the one that establishes 4% rate for residents and non-residents. But as to the last one, the one I can remember right now about the government expenditures, well, the military in Puerto Rico, well, certainly there will be some positive impact as a result of that. There's some construction being generated as the facilities that are being used are improved. And without a doubt, also, the municipalities where that activity is more common, then there's also more economic activity in the commercial sector in these municipalities. I went to a restaurant in Ponce that I really like, and it was full of military people, so that is definitely positive. What I don't think, however, is that it will be a game changer in terms of the economic perspectives that we are experiencing, because obviously we need more. And in relation to construction federal funds, which I believe was your other question, we're using the Core 3 information, the data, and it indicates that if we exclude the COVID funds, what's left to be disbursed is $44 billion. And those $44 billion in our forecasts, we're assuming basically that the disbursement investment will be between $2.5 to $3 billion, and the impact that this will have on the economy obviously will depend on what will happen with construction materials, the availability of labor in the economy, because if these barriers don't change, we can have the 4.4 per year, and we won't be able to invest that because of these limitations we have in our construction industry. And in terms of recommendations, well, I told you already, we cannot continue to rely on the occurrence of a Hurricane Maria or chikungunya or COVID for the federal government to give us money. So I think it is fundamental that we develop a plan, economic development that is very detailed, that includes topics such as human capital. What are we going to do? An economy where more than 30% of people able to work, all they have is a bachelor's degree or less, and a job market where we're betting on pharmaceuticals, medical device sector, IT that require a level of skills that are more specialized on the one hand, and automation is also replacing labor. So what are we going to do in an economy where the population is aging, and the government will clearly have to give more funds to address the needs of the aging population, because the younger people are leaving because the jobs are not quality jobs locally. So all that goes from asking, questioning our institutional model, to addressing topics of human capital, topics of execution, and making sure that the economic development plans. I've been doing this 20 years, and there are many plans. They're being executed and implemented. So we need to implement all these plans that we have, and they all agree on the same thing, that it's a problem of implementing the plans that we do have. And I want to ask about the bill, but the bills that are pending between the House and the Senate. If you have any questions, you can take a note, because we will definitely clarify any question you may have. Excuse me, Mr. Mujica. Thank you for being here. I recently had a conference with Core 3, and they showed us the numbers that the Treasury Committee chair brought to the discussion for federal affairs. And we know we have an X number assigned, committed, and disbursed. When it's obligated, it doesn't mean it's being executed. It's waiting for the process before any agency that is involved in the disbursement of these. But I also know you said that there are development plans and that there's a problem of execution of executing the plans. And at the time, the discussion was, well, I can't put so much money in motion because the filter screen for that to be done, the execution is a little bit narrow. So, and I know you don't have that solution, but I was saying, well, let's refocus in how I can broaden that option in the filter so that they can continue to flow and won't be like remain at a committed or obligated status. And they can actually be put into motion, because that will help create jobs and revenues, and municipalities can receive better revenues, greater revenues. So I don't know, when you talk about execution or performance, could you pinpoint what you're referring to? No, I think there's a confusion. The question was what recommendations I can give. Don't tell me what the problem is, give me recommendations, but I have to discuss the problem, because the reality is that those are obviously connected. But when I referred to that, basically, I was saying that I arrived here in 2000. I mean, I was born in Puerto Rico, as a matter of fact, but then I left. And after I studied, I came back, and I've been working for 26 years. And in 26 years, if I'm not mistaken, more than 5 economic development plans have been established. And if you read them, they all agree on the same prescription. But the question is, why are we here today discussing the fiscal topic, and why are we discussing, or you're making me answer that question and asking me not to give the prescription? The thing is that with 5 or 6 studies that all coincide, 98% on what the problem is, we've had a problem with execution or performance. And in relation to what you're saying about federal funds, it's very simple. If those federal funds are not disbursed because there are some restraints in the process, then the impact of the $44 billion we will not feel in 2026, 2027, maybe in 2030 when they're disbursed. Or when we find a way to channel them to other projects that will meet the same objective. Will anything be felt? Yes. But what I believe is that the discussion is leading us to think about what we have to do for the economy to grow over the next 5 years. And what I'm saying is we must ask ourselves, what do we have to do so that the economy can grow over the next 5 years, but for the growth to be sustainable in the mid and long term? And this requires the execution of all these economic development plans, which basically all match or have the same findings.
The board will review all of the legislation that's been discussed here. We'll review many more pieces of legislation, I'm sure, that haven't been discussed here. And the issue really becomes which things within the economic forecasts and within the revenues that we have, which of them we can actually afford to pay for. And if they're recurring, which ones we can afford to pay for over the next 5 years. And that's the budget exercise, and that's why we're here. So, and we encourage all of the legislators to submit their legislation, and we'll review, respond, and then the important part is actually do this as part of the budget process. So then we can see it all together, not individual pieces, and then we just add them up, and then we see what we can afford. So I look forward to working with you on whatever legislation you want to advance. I also want to acknowledge Director Ekrian Martinez, Director of the Puerto Rico Legislative Assembly Budget Office, who did not acknowledge earlier. Welcome and thank you. I know our teams work together a lot. The next presentation, again, thank you, Adame. Thank you for your presentation and the discussion. I'm sure we'll be talking in the future. The next presentation is from Professor Jose Caraballo Cueto. He's the director of the Center for Development Studies at the University of Puerto Rico. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to make my presentation in Spanglish so that everyone understands what I'm going to say. First of all, I would like to make a disclaimer. My only job is to work for the University of Puerto Rico. So I'm going to start with 3 points about the economy of Puerto Rico and then with 4 options to jumpstart the economic growth in Puerto Rico. The first thing I would like to say is going back to Macroeconomics 101, which is actually a class that I'm going to teach today. We're going to talk. I would like to talk about fiscal multiplier. If we take an accounting perspective to correct the fiscal crisis of Puerto Rico, what we have to do is cut the government expenditures, and that's about it. But guess what? The fiscal multiplier is greater than 1. So it means that if we cut the government budget by $100, the effect on the economy is going to be larger than $100. So at the end, the government revenues are going to decrease, and then you start a vicious cycle. So how do you get out of that vicious cycle? You need economic growth. So I think that is an important thing of this meeting to how we are going to address economic growth. In other words, without economic growth, we are not going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The second point I would like to make is that the forecast, we pay a lot of attention to forecasts. And I know people, there are some friends here in the media, they love that as well. But few people pay attention to the accuracy of those forecasts. So the consultants of the Fiscal Control Board predict that the fiscal year 2025 that just ended, the economy is going to decrease by 0.8%. The Puerto Rico Planning Board forecasts a positive 1.2%. It appears that they were referring to 2 different economies. One was saying it's going to decline, the other is going to grow. I said last year, actually in this symposium, that the economy is going to be around 0%. It's going to be more or less stationary. And at the end of the day, what happened is that the economy grew by 0.4%. So we should pay more attention because I think many of these forecasts have missed the shot several times. And that have led many of our policymakers to make wrong decisions. One of the things, the problem with the forecasts that have been made is that they still consider that the U.S. economy has a huge effect. Especially the business cycle of the U.S. have a huge effect on Puerto Rico, and that's no longer the case. Actually, I made a grander causality test between the U.S. Index of Economic Activity and the Puerto Rico Economic Activity, and there is, I couldn't reject the null hypothesis. In other words, there is no grander causality between those indices. And here you can observe that. So yes, during the period of Section 936, you see a high correlation between the index of economic activity in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico. But after 2006, there is a structural change there. So you can no longer assume that the business cycle in the U.S. is going to impact at the same manner the economy of Puerto Rico. Actually, for many years after 2006, the economy of the United States has been growing while the Puerto Rican economy has been going down. The economy of Puerto Rico lately has been dependent on 2 factors for the economic growth. First, U.S. subsidies. Here I put it as a share of the gross national product, o lo que aquí le llaman el Producto Bruto. Y van a ver ahí cómo después del huracán.
And you're going to see there how after Hurricane Maria, it changed significantly, not just because of the reconstruction funds, but also because of the pandemic funds. And I think that is a consensus between all economists that injection of unusual federal funds has caused economic growth that we're observing. And the other factor is tourism, which has also increased in the past years. The factors, we need more research into that. I know we like to provide a hypothesis, but I like studies to be more rigorous, and we can see that tourism has increased. We've seen a stabilization in the total population. Before Hurricane Maria, it was a cliff downhill all the way. Immigration also reduced significantly.
In out-migration, and actually for a few years we have observed net immigration. That is something new for us for several decades. Employment, total employment have been growing in these few years. You can see that there in the graph, as well as self-employment. We are not sure why self-employment has been growing so much. Probably it's related to the tax reform of 2017. But again, we need robust research more than anecdotes and opinions. The second point I would like to make today, the third one, because the second one was the lack of accuracy in forecasting. The third one is that, well, the economy is growing. What is happening with tax revenues? Consumers, workers in Puerto Rico are paying more taxes at the individual level. Individual income taxes have been growing, as well as sales tax. The tax bracket that has been going down is corporate taxes, especially, as many of you know, se sustituyó aquí el recaudo de la.
There was a substitution of Law 154, the famous 4% for foreign corporations. It's a synonym, the way that it's called in Spanish, two different ways, but basically foreign corporations. And that change has led to a difference in income. We're not paying less taxes, we're paying more taxes. And if we add the tariffs, what the federal government does is that it reduces its operations from the local level, and then the rest is sent to Hacienda. You can look up in the internet, Puerto Rico Trust Fund, 280 million for tariff revenue for Puerto Rican, for the Treasury.
A new tax that we're paying is internet sales tax. Before 2017, many people bought things in the internet to avoid paying taxes in Puerto Rico. A lot of things they used to buy through the internet. Lately, almost everything, even if you want to use Netflix, you're going to pay taxes. So that's a new tax revenue for the general fund. So if you add those two sources, it's almost 450 million additional dollars that are receiving the Treasury. But what is happening with tax revenue? Well, the corporations are paying less. And this is something that has to be fixed, because I think that a tax relief for individual is long overdue. Yo creo que un alivio contributivo a los consumidores es.
Like I just said, this is something that is needed for consumers, because we're paying a lot more taxes and regressive taxes, such as for consumption.
They say that the inflation is below what it is in the States. I'm not sure if they're measuring it properly, especially shrinkflation. Shrinkflation. In Spanish, that is that you go buy beans at the same 99 cents cost, but then you get less ounces of beans. So if you go there and you're going to measure, well, what do beans cost, 99 cents? Oh, there's at the same price and there's no inflation, but then it's going through shrinkflation and other things.
They have a lot of methodological problems, and again, we are paying a lot of attention to forecasts, but what about the actual numbers? Are we measuring those numbers correctly, or we are just doing guesstimates to measure the economy? So in terms of alternative, first, we have to stop searching for a silver bullet. I know that we all know about Operation Bootstrap. Todos sabemos de Operaciones Manos a la Obra y que la industrialización modernizó la economía de Puerto Rico.
Industrialization modernized the economy of Puerto Rico, and thanks to the manufacturing sector, and that's good for history books. But Janet Guyana and I authored a book, Review Development and Economics. And most economies that better grow are those that are diversified and do not depend on only one sector. Economies that depend on only one sector
turn, they were not as successful as those economies that were diversified. So we need to look for broad reform. We need to provide incentive, not tax incentive for all sectors. And we need to make sure that all sectors grew almost in a similar rate. Secondly, we need to do a large reform to tax incentive. We hear, and I would like to quote Albert Einstein. He said that the definition of a crazy person is the one that expects different results by doing the same thing. And we are doing tax incentive here in Puerto Rico unconditionally. So basically we say, I'm going to give you the tax incentive for nothing. You know, I'm just going to have faith that you're going to create employment, that you're going to invest, or better. Yo voy a basarme en lo que tú me vas a prometer.
Or I'll just base myself on the jobs they're promising. They're promised jobs. And what did the federal government under payroll protection program? They said, well, you maintain this payroll and I will give you this loan. And if you don't keep up that payroll, then you will have to pay back that loan. And I will not be able to condone it. And you promised me 200 jobs? Well, here's your tax credit. Some have kept the tax credit without doing anything. And that's a hole we have here in terms of taxes. And as we impose more taxes or reduce taxes for certain sectors, 4% for some sectors, what we're doing is placing a greater burden on the tax base, who are the salaried people, the middle class. So we have to be very careful about giving incentives based on anecdotes instead of based on whether this will really serve as an incentive. Because if I'm given an incentive because I'm a professor, you know, if they tell me, well, you don't have to pay taxes because you're a professor, well, I'll take it. I mean, I won't refuse that, but that won't lead to anything. And I would follow the same course of action with or without such incentives. So I think we do need a broader reform in terms of these incentives so that we can actually get something out of it. And Roy does not measure that, whether we're getting something out of the tax incentives that we grant.
Growth model, there are a couple of factors there. First, interest rate. Second, population growth. Third, physical capital. Fourth, human capital and research and development. Among those factors, the only one that we can control in Puerto Rico is human capital. We cannot control interest rate. We cannot control population growth here. I hope that Puerto Rico become later or sooner than later a refugee zone so that we can attract more immigrants here in Puerto Rico, but that is not going to happen probably in the next couple of years. But the factor that we can control is human capital. But at the same time, the Fiscal Control Board cut the head to the University of Puerto Rico, the only university here that is doing research, and the only R2 university that we have in Puerto Rico. And that is going to be causing problems in the long term for Puerto Rico. So investing in higher education is not an expenditure. Investing in advertising, that is not investment. That is actually an expenditure. Third, we need a fiscal rule. What the Constitution of Puerto Rico is saying, que el presupuesto tiene que estar balanceado, eso.
That the budget must be balanced. It's a fiscal cyclical rule. And what it does is it deepens the economic cycle. If the economy is growing, collections will grow, and if the budget has to be squared away, then that will also increase the economic cycle. The same will happen when the economy falls. Then there will be less collections, and it will deepen that economic cycle. So what the Constitution says is actually wrong. We need a fiscal rule that goes against the cycle. When the economy grows, the government must save. when things are going well, so that when things are going not so well, then they will use their savings and not have to take on debt. I know in Puerto Rico, we're not in the habit of talking about peer review research and journals, but
economies that have been in debt crisis, thanks to a fiscal rule, they gain credibility in capital markets, and that's something that we need to pay more attention, how to amend the Constitution of Puerto Rico to change the current fiscal rule that is there. We need to, as the senator here was mentioning, we need to make more transitions so that people that are right now in government programs, they can complement their incomes and not being penalizados por estar trabajando. Y aquí, por ejemplo, en el caso de la
so that they can work and not be penalized. In construction, many times it's temporary employment. The project will last 3, 6 months, 12 months. And as long as we don't have such transition, as the senator said, then a lot of people can lose access to Medicaid or what we call here the vital plan for several years. So it's not in a lot of people's best interest, because they even if they do know how to work in construction, they're going to say, well, I'm going to take the job because then I'll lose my insurance. So work credit, I think that's one of the best policies that have been implemented in the recent years to incentive work and reduce this inequality. And we talk a lot about statistics, but there are problems in how we're measuring things. And we need to replace imports. We don't talk about exports at all, and in all economies worldwide, they're all aimed at exporting because the local market is too small, and that is something we need to continue to emphasize. And to conclude, and I'm congratulating myself because I actually did not go longer than I was supposed to, but very ephemeral and discrete is this growth that is practically stationary for several years. As long as these federal funds continue to be dispersed very little by little in this so-called pipeline.
Pay attention to how accurate were those projections for the past few years, so that we, in the same manner, put weight on those forecasts. In terms of the Trump administration, I believe that we are living here in Puerto Rico in a much higher inflation than the one that is being measured, not just because of the tariff, but because also of the deportations, and that is going to raise wages, especially in the construction sector, and that is going to be, at the end of the day, translated into higher prices for other sectors. Interest rate, I don't believe is going to be cut, especially for the next couple of quarters. And it's going to be hard to find new additional federal funding. I know that we have become addicted to federal funding lately, and I'm not against. Actually, we need those federal funds to reconstruct our infrastructure. The bad side of it is that we put too much faith on that, and we cannot let go our productive sector. Tenemos que asegurarnos de que esta economía tenga esas bases productivas.
And we have to make sure that the economy has a solid basis so that when we don't have the federal funds, recurring federal funds, the economy can continue to grow anyway. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Yeah, Professor, why, when you mentioned the online sales, porque usted dice que es un nuevo...
Why do you say that's a new tax? Yes, because before 2017, consumers were buying through the internet or via internet online to avoid, let me not say avoid, well, yes, to avoid paying a tax that was not online. People would even buy, it can be books, it can be automobile parts, it can be specific things like this. But now there have been some agreements with Hacienda or the Treasury Department of Puerto Rico, and certain sales that didn't have tax now do. And the last piece of data that I said, I haven't seen it in the statistics for Hacienda, but I saw something from around 2022 or 2023. It was close to 200 million. I don't know how. Yes, it goes up over 200 million. But those purchases since 2006, when that was legislated, in theory, a person that bought remotely via internet was obligated to go to Hacienda when it came to user agreements and such. But there was a change in the Supreme Court of the U.S. that said that jurisdictions could ask these platforms where these purchases are made to retain that income on a sale. So it's not a legislation that established a new tax, because from its origin, ever since it was legislated, technically the obligation of reporting that purchase and the sales tax on its use and such, that obligation was still there. What changed was a decision from the Supreme Court of the U.S. and certainly effective work from Hacienda to make that be applied or followed, that taxing those products coming from the internet. Yes, I agree. Yes, there was an obligation. But what I was making reference to, beyond what the statute says, if it's de facto or whatnot, nowadays when you compare 2017 to the current period, you see an increase to what is being. And if we talk about fiscal neutrality, and we're putting our hands in the pockets of people on one hand with tariffs, on the other hand with taxes, the idea would be to give them some relief. Yes, and that is something that we have presented to the board, the fiscal board, and they're right here. In fact, it's a source of financing for some initiatives in Puerto Rico's government, but we'll continue working with that or giving that fight.
Any other questions?
Sí, Director Topal.
Yes, Director from OPAL here. Just one question for Mr. Caraballo Cueto, for the Secretary of Hacienda. How much do you expect that the government retains or keeps from the Puerto Rico Trust Fund, or what is the amount, if you would know that? Do you have that piece of data? Or if you have it, of course. Well, it was difficult for me to get that data because it wasn't clear. Even public officials weren't sure of if it was coming in or not. But the federal government, as the first speaker said, there's been a lot of uncertainty when it comes to those tariffs. They've gone up and down. But if the rates stay at the level that they have, at least when the fiscal year 2025 ended, then it's likely that the same level of 285 million will be kept. But if there's a commercial war, in particular with China, where Puerto Rico matters a lot, then that might be even greater. Hello, Orlando Rivera, Director of the OGP office, OMB office. Puerto Rico has received around 300 million during this fiscal year, and it's expected to receive 500,000. This is an official notification that the federal government has done for the Puerto Rican government. Excellent. And that piece of data, I can find it in a page, or once it's materialized and officialized, then we will be publishing it in our pages. Thank you.
First, I just wanted to recognize House, who's just arrived, the Honorable Johnny Mendez, welcome, and thank you for joining us. We're in the middle of a Q&A, so don't worry if you want to make it okay. A couple things just to clarify. This is an economic forecasting conference, and I say it's the foundation of the beginning of the budget process because we use the economic forecast as an input into the revenue forecast. And then the revenue forecast, this is a little budget 101. The revenue forecast is then an input to the budget process. So notwithstanding what happens in the economy, there's always a question of what happened in the economy and how did that impact revenues? They're correlated, but they don't necessarily go together all the time. And everyone spends, and if you saw the first presentation was, we thought this was going to happen and all of this happened, but here we are. And then the economists spend a lot of time trying to figure out what actually impacted what. Tariff situation fluctuates. We talk about the PR trust fund and potential additional revenues. The revenues in hand are the ones we have. There's volatility there. They could change. Are they recurring? These are all the things that we have to take into account. But the critical part is, when we talk about budgeting, is what are the revenues going to look like? And then how much do we have to spend responsibly? And in budgeting, you can always, overperformance is a good thing, right? So, because you don't want to spend more than you have, right? So you get a bill at home and you can't pay it, you have a problem. If your revenues come in higher, that's not the worst problem. Then we can figure out what other things we should do. Should we save it? Should we spend it on something? Or should we go and securitize it for spending in the future many things? That is the discipline that this is, part of. And so when we talk about most states, and I hesitate to say all because I don't have the facts, require balanced budgets. Balanced budgets generally, most businesses require balanced budgets. I would say most of you at home try to balance your budgets. Some nations, and we distinguish because when we say we want to, what we're talking about here, that some people talking about is deficit spending. The federal government can spend more than they have because they print money. Other nation states can spend more than they have because they print money. There are impacts of that. Puerto Rico for 20 years spent more than they had, but we couldn't print money, so we issued debt. And that's why we're actually here, right? Because we had a massive amount of debt. We've corrected that. Working together with the government, we've corrected that. But the implication that we should go back to potentially spending more than we have, right, is something that, we should have a discussion about. And if you can't print money, the only way to do that would mean that you saved money when you had overperformance, right? So the only way to do this is to make sure you have reserves.
That's the counter-cyclical.
Right, I understand. So that would mean you have to have reserves to do that, which goes to the other point, which is then you can't spend all that you have in any given year, because the point is build up reserves so that when there is a blip in the economy, when there is a downturn, you have reserves to do that. Yep. So our challenge here is what the revenue numbers are, how much do we spend on a recurring basis, how much do we put into reserves, and then how much do we keep or maintain for liabilities that we know we have and are coming, so that we have the money set aside for that, because that's not really then a reserve, right? That's money set aside for a bill that we know is coming. And so this is the discipline of budget reform as we're going forward. And here, in the last few years, that has been done. Legislation here and there where we may disagree, but as a general matter, that has been done. When it comes to revenue forecast post-22, since it was raised, there was an extraordinary amount of noise post-COVID. Federal government injected an enormous amount of revenue into the system, nationally and here in Puerto Rico. And that threw off all forecasts. So post-22, post-23, people projected massive declines. It turned out to be the exact opposite. So those are the challenges that we're facing right now. Today, our revenue forecast, again, not the economic forecast, our revenue forecast seems to be very close to what we think it's going to end at. Within $100, $200 million, which is relatively close. The goal is not to be correct. And I always, with the economists, it's never who's right or, it's who's less wrong at times, right? Because no one's gonna hit it right on. If we could hit it right on, none of us would be sitting at these tables, right? But that's where we are. Within $100 or $200 million on the revenue forecast is probably where we're going to be. On a budget the size of a general fund of over $13 billion, it's good. And we may have underestimated before. But when you underestimate revenues, all that means is the money stays with the people of Puerto Rico. You have it to spend in the next year. And then the question is, do you spend it on recurring things? Do you spend it on one-time things? But we are still not fully out of the bankruptcy, right? We still have all looming PREPA bankruptcy out there, and there are going to be some tough decisions that have to be made around that. Lots of people have opinions about how those bills should be paid, and that's a question we have to have because those are big numbers. So the foundation principle is let's have an open, honest discussion about the revenue forecasts, right? And this is why we want diverse opinions here talking. But let's remember, this is part of the budget exercise is the critical exercise. And the same kind of attention that we're doing here, we should pay attention there and just recognize all of the things that we've spoken about a lot of things on this panel. Many of them either decrease revenues or increase spending. All of those we just have to add up and then figure out what we can and can't do. The good news is working on the colleagues sitting on both left and right and outside of this room, people are very responsible and are paying attention to these issues that we're bringing to light. So I want to thank you, but I want to also just point out the budgeting aspect. The economy is going to happen one way or the other, and as many of them pointed out, we don't control many of those things. They're not within our control. What is within our control is how much we spend and the commitments that we make and the budgets, and that's entirely under our control. If we don't, we're going to go to the next presenter, Xavier Divi. He's the director of V2A Consulting, and this is the conclusion of our presentations. We're going to conclude with a little bit different perspective, a perspective of business and market analytics perspective. Xavier, he's the director of V2A Consulting, and he leads the firm's market and business analytics practice, overseeing economic research related to Puerto Rico, including predictive modeling, market intelligence, and geographic analysis. So with that, Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and muchas gracias. I'm going to be talking about two things, the economic trends and the outlook for 2026 as part of the work to do the forecast of the budget of 2026 year. as you know, the Puerto Rico economy had economic depression starting in 2006, where we lost we reduced more than 20% on an annual basis our GDP output. We had the hurricanes Irma and Maria and the pandemic, and we saw a swift recovery after that to levels that were above what we had seen previous to the pandemic. But in the past year and a half, 2 years, the economic activity has slowed down. It has stalled, as you can see in the left-hand side chart. One of the main drivers, as my colleagues were mentioning, have been for this recovery after the pandemic, have been the substantial increase in inflows from the federal government, which have more than doubled between 2017 and 2025. And that's actually a challenge for the Puerto Rico economy because most of them were non-recurrent, and we'll see how we adapt our economy to a progressive reduction in those funds in the coming years. The truth is that not only we experienced an initial recovery thanks through these inflows, but also the liquidity of businesses and the Puerto Rico families increased substantially between 2019 and 2021. The deposits in local banks and in credit unions increased by 20 billion between those 2 years. And although they have reduced, as I think Leslie was mentioning, they're still high, and we still see these deposits above pre-pandemic levels. The total employment, as was mentioned after the pandemic, has experienced an important increase. We have more employees today than we've had in the past decades. And the good the positive thing is that it's been driven by the private sector, right? The total public employment versus or as a percentage to the total employment has decreased from what we used to have in 35% in the 1990s to 20-21% nowadays. It's true that in recent months and the past year, the increase in employment has been slowing down. But still growing. Which are the main sectors that have been driving the increase in total employment? Well, if we look at it since the pandemic, the truth is it's been across the board, across industries. Maybe we should mention the tourism sector, which has been booming in the past years. The construction sector, obviously, through the reconstruction efforts in Puerto Rico after the pandemic, has also been a driver of employment growth. And the third one that we see here as well is the business services, which are, many of them are around the support for the reconstruction efforts, being engineering companies, architects, project management, consulting, legal, accounting, these type of jobs. But in the past year, the results are more mixed. We have several industries that actually have reduced their total employment, but good news is the tourism sector has continued to be an important driver of employment growth in Puerto Rico. Regarding consumption, as we've seen in the economic activity and also in the slowdown of employment growth, we saw a jump after the pandemic, driven mainly by the higher liquidity of families and after the inflows coming from the federal government, but it has slowed down also, and actually it has increased in the past year less than the inflation, which we know it's probably understated. The average salary in Puerto Rico has, as I think Leslie was mentioning that as well, has been growing faster than the inflation level. So that means that we've had a real purchasing power increase in recent years, which has added also to the high levels of liquidity that we see in the deposits in local banks. So in general, the main messages regarding recent economic activity is that it has stalled after a period of important increase after the pandemic. But still the balance sheet of businesses and families, we see it at a better shape than what we had in other periods in our history. Looking at the 2026 outlook, there are several factors that are important in order to know which may be the impact on the Puerto Rico government. Obviously, the U.S., what happens with the U.S. economy has an impact on Puerto Rico because of the ties that we have with the U.S. economy. Most forecasts, and we saw the first presentation, go around 2 to 3% real GDP growth in the U.S., which is not far from what we saw in 2025. We are likely to continue seeing some economic uncertainty and geopolitical uncertainty, which is not going to be much different from what we saw in 2025 also, so not much difference in that area against the last year. Regarding federal funding, the truth is that at this time last year we had drastic or important concerns about potential drastic reductions in the federal funds at the U.S. level, but also impacting Puerto Rico. The truth is that uncertainty has reduced, or that risk has reduced. So in that sense, we have to be a little bit more positive. Regarding the third aspect that we are using for our forecast, the increase in trade tariffs, obviously this has an important impact for Puerto Rico. More than 40% of the food that we purchase in Puerto Rico comes from third countries. So obviously the tariffs are going to have an impact on the budget of our consumers. What we saw in 2025 is that initially a good portion of those increases were absorbed by the businesses. That happens sometimes when these tariffs increase, and there are studies in the U.S. that show how that happened. But normally, as time goes by, the businesses start translating more and more those increases to the final prices, and we expect that to happen more in 2026. So our outlook in this sense is a little bit more pessimistic than what we had last year. The next one has to do with the tourism business, which has been, as I was mentioning, it has been booming, has been a very important driver for the Puerto Rico economy. We had a record year last year in terms of visitors. We expect the tourism sector to continue to be an important driver, probably not at the growth levels that we've seen in previous years. We know that based on surveys performed today in the U.S., that the U.S. families are more concerned about their budget and they're looking for reductions in their spending. So that is probably will have some impact on the visitors to Puerto Rico, but we still expect the numbers to be high compared to previous years as well. And finally, the reshoring process after the increase in the tariffs seems to be starting to happen. Last year was a record year in Puerto Rico in terms of investments committed by multinationals expanding or relocating some plants in Puerto Rico. We have to be cautious about that. Puerto Rico has important infrastructural limitations and concerns, and the trade tariff policy is quite volatile at the moment. So it's not the decisions by executives on a long-term basis require more certainty in that sense. So we will need to be cautious about seeing this reshoring trend continue in Puerto Rico. So all in all, our outlook for 2026 is for an economy to be flat against 2025 in our base case scenario, which is similar to what other economists have been talking about today. Looking at a more long-term basis, obviously we need to look for an economy that is growing on a sustained basis and less dependent on external help. And for that, it is important to have, I guess, radical or meaningful structural changes in the local economy. We have some of them here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but we are positive around some of them. The fiscal discipline, I mean, we're very positive about that. We finally have a first balanced fiscal budget after, I believe, we're 16 consecutive fiscal deficits before Promesa, which is not sustainable, and we know the consequence of doing that. Maybe the one where we are more pessimistic is in the measures to make our economy or our market more free, have more economic freedom. We continue to be one of the most regulated markets in the U.S. We rank last in almost all surveys that are done in the U.S. regarding ease of doing business in Puerto Rico. We have a permitting system that is cumbersome, is bureaucratic. The property registration system is expensive and also cumbersome. We regulate more than 130 professions in Puerto Rico. 13 of them are not regulated in any other state in the U.S. 34, I believe, are regulated only in 5 states or less in the U.S. Our tax system is complex as well, and the tax burden is high, despite the fact that we do not pay federal taxes. So in this sense, economic freedom should be probably one of the priorities going forward to make the economy more dynamic and to have an economy that has more business opportunities for local investors and outside investors as well. Regarding human capital, we know that that educational attainment in Puerto Rico and the educational results in Puerto Rico are below what we see in the U.S. states and in the U.S. in general. And this is not a problem of budget. We have a budget per student that is comparable to many states in the United States. So it has more to do with the allocation of that budget, that goes maybe in a big portion to centralized entities rather than going directly to the schools, to the teachers, and to the student. So there has to be some job to do. There are discussions around that, and there's probably going to be changes, but it's something that we should be looking at. Obviously, the infrastructural problems that we have, we've been underinvesting in our infrastructure for a lot of years, and that requires putting money on making it more functional and more reliable. So we hope to see that improving also going forward. And we know there is a big federal budget committed to the reconstruction of the electrical system. And finally, obviously, the population growth, which is probably the result of not having an economy that is dynamic, that provides the opportunities to our entrepreneurs or professionals, and with changes in making our market more dynamic and freer, make our young professionals and entrepreneurs stay in Puerto Rico, not having to move outside. So basically, that's our outlook also for the more longer term view of Puerto Rico. Eso es todo. Gracias por el.
And that is all. Thank you for the time that you've granted me.
It's the benefit of being last, is that maybe people are tired and don't have any questions. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for that other perspective and pointing out some of the things. I think many of those things we're trying to address right now, so I appreciate it. Any further questions from anyone at the table? No. Any questions for anyone in the audience? If anyone has any questions, or a few minutes from any questions.
Back up. Representative Joe Frankie, yeah, you can back up.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, thank you. As you said before, if the Puerto Rico budget has a surplus of money, you said what we're going to do with that money. You said invest it or leave it over there to the future if there is needed. The thing is that when you put the money in the bank and they have no interest, you are losing money like the federal funds in the future. Mm-hmm. The money, you can buy less because of the inflation. So where the money of the people of Puerto Rico is put on, in what accounts, and what percentage of interest is given to the people of Puerto Rico, that we are not losing money every year because of the inflation of the money. That's why I'm worried, because if we leave the money just in accounts over there, that money is going to buy less in the future, or it's better to invest it now in the economy.
Sure. It's a standard practice to build up reserves when you have the funds. And Puerto Rico, particularly, according to the IMF, as everyone knows, we're in a hurricane zone. We've set aside $1.3 billion to deal with emergencies that result from storms. And the government periodically has accessed those funds and replenished them, as you know. Puerto Rico actually has a reserve fund on the books that's been there for years, that also hasn't been funded for years, which is something we need to revisit. And then there's rainy day funds, which are for when the economy goes down, and as the professor mentioned, what you would do, how you would access those funds when there's a revenue shortfall or a revenue downturn. If you look at the size of Puerto Rico's budget, that would be sized at close to $1.7 billion. And we don't have that reserve in place. So these are standards that would help you not go into the problems that we had before, because you deal with these things. And then potentially you access, if you write the law correctly, you'd be able to access it during an economic downturn, to your point, because sometimes, and I don't disagree with you, the worst thing that you have to do is have to do budget cuts, severe budget cuts, at a time when people are suffering the most. And if you have the reserves in place, you could use that as a buffer to growth. But that requires you to have the money set aside, $1.7 billion, which is what the standard practice would be. We're going to have another symposium on budgeting in April, and those are the kinds of things we'll talk about there. But your point was about the interest rate. I have the Treasury Secretary here, who's in charge of keeping all the money, and we do get interest, on the accounts. It's liquid, and we are earning the interest, and that interest does accrue to the people of Puerto Rico. It's been hundreds of millions of dollars, and that becomes part of the revenues that we have. Could we get better interest rates? I'm all for it. We invested in the banks in Puerto Rico, so that's part of it. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on, is there a way to get better interest rates on the monies that we're doing? But it's sitting here in our banks here locally, which presumably is also helping the economy. But I'm always in favor of getting the best interest rates that we possibly can, because we can use that money.
Yes, a couple of years ago, there was we sat with the financial institutions and revisited the interest rates that were being provided to the government of Puerto Rico. And although at that time the most competitive rates were not the ones that the government was receiving from the financial institutions, that was renegotiated. Obviously, the interest rates can fluctuate for each quarter, even on an annual basis. And that's something that we need to monitor and sit down with the financial institutions to ensure and make sure that the government is receiving the best interest rates in the market. But that was renegotiated a couple years back. And I think from a competitive standpoint on the best rates out there in the market, the government of Puerto Rico, in terms of the general fund, is well positioned in terms of what the interest rates we're receiving right now.
Yeah, and this is the kind of information they say, transparency is best, right? This information should be public. You should see them, and it's welcome discussion on if there are ways to improve that. It's hard. You can only get what the institutions are willing to give you. Any other questions? Espera un momento para mi micrófono. Gracias.
For the record, Edwin Garcia Feliciano, Citizens Advocate. Historically, we haven't seen a separation of budgeting. We haven't seen funds for economic investment, funds that we can put or towards those that want to be entrepreneurs with it. There are small activities that are done, but not on a big scale. We haven't talked about informal economy. We haven't talked about the effect of informal economy on Puerto Rico's economic development. Even though we talked about economic development plans, sometimes you want to think of a development plan, whichever it is. We want everybody to know it. I want to know towards what direction Puerto Rico's economy is walking, and think about my children as a father and say, well, the economy is going this direction, the university is going this other direction, and I want my children to have a clear vision. But this sometimes doesn't get to the population, maybe the ones in the government, the ones that prepare the plan, but not necessarily the general population. And these forums, this is a recommendation for the executive director, these forums shouldn't be done just in San Juan. I remember a forum that Acevedo Vila did in Ponce, and it was extraordinary many years ago. We need to get to regions. We need to get to every region in Puerto Rico. The strategy here for the southeastern region of Puerto Rico, it's Puerto Rico's poorest region throughout all of its history, year after year. We've been saying the same thing, but there isn't even a development plan for the southeastern part of Puerto Rico. Over 500 abandoned schools in Puerto Rico. We've let the office know of a concept of using them for residences, demolishing them and reusing the space. Since these schools aren't close to any of us, then those ruins that are left there, we're happy. We don't know about that. That's not next to our homes. But those are ruins that aren't doing anything. It's a wasted space with an amount of land that could be developed for living or for other economic activities if that's what we wanted. And I remember in 1989 when from Camuy the representative won the elections there. One of the first things that we questioned about that, because from the analysis the government was making, there were industries saying that they would generate 200 employments or 200 jobs, they would only generate 100, and that would affect the municipality's patent, because then their contributions would basically ruin the municipal patent.
I know sometimes we talk about the government being too large. It may be that in certain areas of the private sector it is. Certainly it is important that we see economic growth, but the government also has the duty to serve the people. And every year we attend to 30,000 people who come to our office because some agency of the executive branch has not attended to them, has not assisted them. And the government is not only there to address the economic situation of Puerto Rico, but also to attend to citizens, which are the ones who are the reason for any government to exist.
When we are doing the budget, to address these things if we're going to get them in the budget. If we don't do them in the budgets, right, they're not going to get done. We don't have the money to do them later. So we'll work with the representatives to see, make these a priority. Should we set money aside for economic development? Yeah, we should. All of these things require, right, this establishing priorities. If we're going to set it aside for this, right, it's not available for other things. But we think permanent infrastructure, that are going to impact Puerto Rico's economy over the long term, arguably those should be the priorities when you have one-time funds. Okay, if we conclude today's Economic Forecast Symposium, I want to thank the economists for participating. I want to thank our government leaders for participating, the legislative participants who spent the time here for their thoughtful contributions. And just remember, consensus, we want to have a consensus forecasting process, but consensus does not mean unanimity. It means that we're going to have a shared starting point. And the perspectives shared today are an essential part of developing a transparent, credible, informed macroeconomic forecast that will support the fiscal planning and Puerto Rico's ongoing fiscal transformation. This symposium lays the foundation for better budgets, better decisions, and a more stable fiscal future for Puerto Rico. Future symposiums will include, we hope, working together, economic and revenue projections as a critical element in the government budget's fiscal plan process. The Oversight Board has already begun macroeconomic and revenue modeling working sessions with the government officials to design a locally driven model to forecast into the future that has improved over what was in the past. We've seen a strong commitment from the executive and have dedicated government resources to achieve long-lasting success in this area. But it's critically important, and people ask what needs to get done. Institutionalizing permanent budget reforms are essential for sustaining fiscal stability once the Oversight Board's supervision ends. It will enable Puerto Rico to produce balanced budgets independently, sustain fiscal responsibility, and regain market access. But gaining market access means regaining market confidence so that we don't return to the pre-crisis practices. You need people who are invested in this. You need process improvements that we're working on. And then you have technology improvements and systems. And we're making the investments to do that. Those are the pillars of fiscal discipline and sustained fiscal stability, in addition to reliable economic and revenue forecasting based on best practices. This means that we have to have a disciplined budgeting practices across all agencies and transparent reporting practices. We're working on them. We need a capital plan. This is one of the things that were mentioned. Are we investing in these areas beyond the federal funds, which will go away for recovery? Puerto Rico needs to have a funded capital plan. And right now we don't have access to the credit markets. So that means that we're going to have to fund it with local resources. That's part of what we're talking about here with our current dollars. If there are current dollars available, how much are we going to set aside for economic development, for infrastructure, until we can regain access to the credit markets? Because it's not all federal funds. And then we have an integrated accounting system, which we hope is going to be launched very soon. Right? The Hacienda and OEP are working on that. Our next symposium will be on budget transformation, and we will explore the other critical elements of budget reform. So we hope to see all of you then. Stay tuned for more details. And today we really appreciate your participation. It's been longer than we anticipated, the level of engagement, the attention, and we look forward to continuing a dialogue as part of our collective responsibility for Puerto Rico's future. I want to thank, again, the Senate for providing this beautiful space that we celebrate this important event. So thank you, and this concludes today's symposium. Gracias a todos.